Thousands join rally protesting against abuse of foreign maids. A warning about rising recurrent expenditure of the government. And close to 30 wounded in another explosion in Bangkok.
Good evening. Thousands of foreign domestic helpers marched to the central government offices today to condemn the alleged abuse of an Indonesian maid. Organisers say over 5,000 people joined the rally, while the police put the number at 2,100 at the peak of the protest. Meanwhile, police and Labour Department officials will go to Indonesia tomorrow to take a statement from the domestic helper involved. Rani Samtani reports.
Several foreign domestic helper groups organized a protest march from Southorn Playground in Wan Chai to the police headquarters and central government offices.
We want her employer to go to jail.
We hope that after they sterilely arrest the employer and they bring the case to the court, we should stop any abusive employer from treating the helper like this.
A second Indonesian domestic helper, Suzy, claims she was also abused by the same employer as Ariana. She accused the employer of beating her multiple times, adding that she was not allowed to contact her family back home during the 11 months of her employment here. Suzy gave her statement to the police this morning. Members of the public also joined the protest.
I hope the police can take immediate action to arrest that employer. But at the same time, we think that the migrant worker situation in Hong Kong is very vulnerable. So we must do something to protect their rights.
As the group marched to police headquarters, they donned red headbands, calling not only for justice for Ariana, but for all domestic helpers in Hong Kong.
This issue is it's not just about Indonesians. This is about treatment of all foreign domestic workers in Hong Kong. We have provided services to hundreds of thousands of families. We just want respect, and we hope that the governments, both the Hong Kong and the Indonesian governments, will also review their existing policies and will repeal the policies that have placed migrant domestic workers in a very vulnerable, abusive, and slave-like condition.
In Indonesia, a hospital spokesman said Ariana remains in serious condition with multiple injuries all over her body. Ariana's father plans to sue the employee suspected of abusing her, as well as the employment agency for negligence. Today, Secretary for Labor and Welfare Matthew Jung said 2 Labor Department officials will accompany police officers to Indonesia to interview Ariana.
Our objective is to talk to the domestic helper to establish the facts. And I stress we will pursue the case relentlessly to ensure that domestic helpers in Hong Kong are properly protected.
Jung added that once Ariana recovers, they may ask her to return to Hong Kong for legal proceedings. Rani Samtani, TVB News.
Meanwhile, thousands of people took part in another rally at the central government offices demanding the implementation of 15 years of free education. Rachel Lung has more.
Teachers and parents are stepping up their fight for the younger generation. Organizers of the rally say around 2,500 people joined the call for an expansion of Hong Kong's free education system.
Just for the free education, for the early child education, we need to group together to have our needs.
As a teacher, she hopes the government will set up a standard salary scale for kindergarten teachers. Many of them believe the annual increase of $2,500 in the value of kindergarten vouchers, as mentioned in the chief executive's policy address, fails to offset inflation.
The school fee will still increase, and if the half-day school's voucher is the same as the full-time school, I think it doesn't help.
Although a committee on free kindergarten education was set up, no timetable has been formulated. Protesters think this is just another way for the government to drag its feet on proper education plans for our next generation. Meanwhile, Secretary for Education Eddie Ng said today the government is looking into ways to implement 15 years of free education. He said the Committee on Free Kindergarten Education is putting in its best effort to come up with a proposal next year. Ng also responded to concerns about mainland parents using fake addresses in Hong Kong to get their children into local primary schools of their choice.
And we have a very, very effective mechanism and procedure right now to verify the true address. And parents are advised to make sure they provide the truthful address.
He warned that if parents are found to have provided false addresses, their children will lose their school places. Rachel Ling, TVB News.
The financial secretary reassured the public today the government does have the fiscal ability to implement the measures outlined in this year's policy address. But John Tsang also warned there will come a day when the public purse comes under pressure if the government spending is left unchecked. Vicky Kung reports.
Big public spending outlined in this year's policy address has led to speculation over whether Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying and Financial Secretary John Tsang see eye to eye on money matters. Tsang said earlier this year's recurrent expenditure would be at least $20 billion over budget. But the CE says the government has the means to meet the needs of the people.
We do have the financial capability to pay for the measures and initiatives I announced this morning in the policy address, particularly as we do have very, very good potential to grow an even stronger economy at an even higher rate. And that will give government the necessary public finance to achieve the targets.
Today, the financial secretary wrote on his blog saying the current government has the fiscal ability to roll out the new policies. But he also warned if spending remains at a high level, there will be a day when the city's reserves are exhausted and the government will then have to either increase taxes or borrow money. So when would that day come? A government commission established last year estimates reserves won't be exhausted during the current administration. But it believes Hong Kong is not far from having barren reserves if new policies are added yearly to tackle problems such as an aging population. Tsang denied he's rejecting new policies, but insisted the government should be more prudent when approving measures that require recurrent expenditure. Vicky Kong, TVB News.
Turning overseas now, and Thai police say at least 28 people were wounded today, several of them seriously, after explosions rocked a gathering of anti-government protesters in the capital Bangkok. It comes only 2 days after one person was killed and dozens were hurt when a grenade was hurled at demonstrators trying to bring down caretaker Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawat's government. Another round of violence in the Thai capital today amid the ongoing standoff between the government of caretaker Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawat and her opponents. Authorities said dozens of people were wounded this afternoon after explosions at an anti-government protest camp near Victory Monument. It follows last night's shooting of an anti-government protester and comes only 2 days after a grenade was hurled at demonstrators, killing one and wounding dozens more. Like the previous incidents, authorities don't know who might have carried out the attacks. Still, prolonged violence, even on a small scale, increases the chance that the military will stage a coup. Such a scenario would benefit protesters, who have called on the army to take sides as they don't have the numbers to bring down the government on their own. Both sides are playing a waiting game, with protesters hoping their campaign will derail next month's snap elections and force the army to take action. Yingluck's opponents also know they can't win an election, which is why they must win on the streets. Meanwhile, Yingluck is banking on the protest campaign running out of steam sooner or later. Anxious about triggering possible military intervention, she's ordered police to avoid confrontations with demonstrators. It's aimed at preventing a mass outbreak of violence, but it has also undermined the rule of law and the government's authority. The instability is the latest in the ongoing struggle between the Shinawat family, supported by the rural poor, and Thailand's royalist and wealthier classes. Yingluck's opponents say the Shinawats are using their electoral majority to impose their will and subvert democracy. They believe Yingluck is a proxy for her brother Thaksin, who went into self-exile after being ousted as Prime Minister in 2006.
but remains influential in Thai politics.
Egyptian authorities claim more than 98% of voters back plans for a new constitution for the country. The turnout for the two-day referendum was lower than expected, with under 40% of the electorate taking part. The vote advances a transition plan by the military-backed government after the toppling of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi last July, following mass unrest over his rule. Well, world powers and the United Nations have welcomed the Syrian opposition's agreement to take part in next week's international conference in Switzerland to seek an end to Syria's civil war. The Syrian National Coalition, Syria's main opposition bloc, announced its decision after a vote last night in the Turkish city of Istanbul, where many Syrian exiles are based. The talks, known as the Geneva II Conference, will be chaired by the UN Secretary-General and will be held in two parts this month.
There were clashes between Turkish police and hundreds of protesters in the capital, Ankara, and Istanbul overnight. Protesters were demonstrating against draft legislation, which opponents say will expand government controls over the internet. In Istanbul, police broke up groups of protesters gathered at the city's main hub, Taksim Square, and along a main city street in the city. The controversial bill, an amendment to the existing law, will give the government the authority to keep records of all user activities for up to 2 years. And still ahead in our newscast, foreign experts report exonerates a local heart surgeon. People waiting for public housing may actually be lower than it appears. And Mongkok street performers have to go elsewhere during weekdays.